And at the time of my life, like, I didn't want to swim anymore. I had a gun on the table. I was out of here. I didn't want to be alive anymore when all of this happened, okay? Shame like I had never experienced before. Kind of shame, you forget how to breathe. Yeah, okay. I've read all Sam Harris. I've watched all the TED Talks.
Yeah, right.
And was really good at attacking Catholicism because it made me feel superior. It
so
made
you
me
were
feel
kind of agnostic/atheist at the time.
Yes, I'd like to argue because it made me feel like I was in power.
Right, yeah.
I'd like to be contrarian.
Yeah.
I like to sit with a bishop and then put you on your heels because that would make me feel powerful.
Right.
Which I find most secular people enjoy, the control of it.
Yeah.
Because so much of life is uncontrollable, to feel in control feels good. So I was that guy.
Hey friends, in this video, Shia LaBeouf's going to explain to us what it's like to hit rock bottom and how his pride and ego led him to a very destructive place. Let's listen to what he has to say.
Jim Townsend was a Capuchin who formerly was a con man. He was a convict. He had murdered his pregnant wife and then spent 20 years in prison and then spent 35 years in the seminary or 35 years in the order.
In the order, yeah.
He was another invite for a person who felt totally depraved when I walked in. You know, I walked into this, my life was on fire. I was walking out of hell. It wasn't like I willingly came in here on a white horse singing show tunes. I came in here on fire and I didn't want to be an actor anymore. And my life was a mess, complete mess. And I had hurt a lot of people and I felt deep shame, deep guilt. I didn't like to go outside much. I really, like, I had a yearning not be here anymore. I was willing because pain made me willing to go about this in a different way than I had previously. You know, my opinion about God before this happened, before the pain struck, before my world had crumbled was art, love, and God, they all mean the same thing. They're synonymous. And as an artist who creates art, I found myself in a godly position often, right? Where I was in charge. And I had also been told my whole life, like, it's up to you. And I always really felt that. And it made it hard to believe in God because it felt like my managerial skills are what are going to amount to a fulfilled existence.
Yeah.
When all of my designs failed, when all of my plans went out the window, when my life had led to serious infliction of pain and damage on other people, I threw up my hands like my plans are garbage and I don't want to be here anymore. And that was required to enter PO. You had to actually, it's why it feels like celestial mathematics or some kind of divine, it feels way, too coincidental to be a coincidence. What now looks like a salvific journey from my side, I was still egotistical on max. I was still grasping at straws. How do I hold on to what I've lost? How do I build a career again? And so when this director who I respected, I had known he made movies that I really loved. You know, Bad Lieutenant for me is one of the greatest performances ever made. And I know he's an actor's director. And the fact that there was this director reaching out to me, because at this point I'm nuclear. Nobody wants to talk to me, including my mother. The manager's not calling, the agent's not calling. I'm not connected to the business anymore. And so the fact that this man reached out to me felt like something like, in my egoic mind, wow, this is a miracle.
This is my chance.
This is my chance. Yeah. And so my ego shows up. And now I'm like, yeah, well, Padre Pio. And my ego is what makes me research Pio. It's not my Catholicism or my yearning towards God. So you thought
this would be a cool role for me to play.
Great, now I can get back on the horse.
Yeah, okay.
And so I start researching Pio. And as I'm researching Pio, he tells me about his plans to make a movie. And he tells me that Willem Dafoe is going to be in the movie. And now I'm really in ego. Wait, so I can go from bottom barrel to working with Willem Dafoe? This is my chance, back on the hustle, back on the ego.
Yeah.
And I start leaning into this thing, and he says, well, if you want to do this role, I need you to start researching, go up and find I need you to go find a seminary, a Catholic seminary.
That's when you made your way up to send a
guy named Brother Jude, who starts talking to me about the gospel. And he says, well, if you're going to play Pio, you need to read the gospel. And so I'd never read the gospel. And he's reading Matthew to me.
So you'd never read the Gospel of Matthew straight through?
Yeah, okay. I've read all Sam Harris. I've watched all the TED Talks.
Yeah, right.
And was really good at attacking Catholicism because it made me feel superior.
It made me feel kind of agnostic/atheist at the time.
Yes, I'd like to argue because it made me feel like I was in power.
Right. Yeah.
I'd like to be contrarian. Yeah. I like to sit with a bishop and then put you on your heels because that would make me feel powerful.
Right.
Which I find most secular people enjoy. The control of it.
Yeah.
because so much of life is uncontrollable, to feel in control feels good.
Shia just explained his experience of dealing with ego and wrestling with pride. Let's listen to what Bishop Barron has to say when he's addressing the 7 deadly sins, but specifically pride and what it does to us, before we hear about where Shia LaBeouf ended up.
Yeah, to name them, pride, envy, anger, sloth, avarice, gluttony, and lust are the 7 deadly sins. Or called capital sins sometimes, from caput. They're the head sins from which things tend to flow. The most fundamental is pride. Probably most people today, if you talk about like vice or you talk about a deadly sin, they would think about lust. But the classical authors, including Dante, who does this pictorially, that's the least of the deadly sins is lust, because it's the one that's most sort of dependent upon the body and its passions and so on. The most important is pride. Pride is the deadliest of deadly sins, and it's very simple to see why. Pride is Augustine calls it incurvatus in se. I'm caved in around myself, like a black hole, right? To get into the scientific, but the black hole to me is a great symbol. That it's so heavy that it draws everything, including light. Nothing can escape from it. See, that's the sinner. We're all sinners. We're like black holes, that we draw everything into ourselves. So as a sinner, and look, I'll confess I'm a sinner. The temptation is, okay, this is the Bishop Barron moment, and I'm drawing you now into my world and so on. What that does is it kills us off, and it darkens life, and it makes it small and heavy and awful, right? It's like, but see, compared to the contrasting thing is when you're lost in a moment, you're not concerned about the impression I'm making. You're not concerned about drawing the world into yourself. You're not concerned about this monkey on my back that's always telling me, look good and sound right. But you're lost in something. You're just talking, to a friend, and the two of you together are discovering something true or beautiful. Or you're lost in a movie, or you're lost in a book. Those are the best moments in life. Those are the best because they're the least prideful moments, right? That's when the light comes out. I become radiant because I'm overcoming this tendency to fall in on myself. Dante is so good because the way he pictures Satan in Divine Comedy, and he's at the center of the earth, so like a black hole that way. Like he's at the center of gravity. He's at the heaviest place, and there's not fire where he is, but ice, which is much, much better image. That you're frozen in place and you're stuck, and he's got wings. Right? And they used to be angel wings because he's an angel, but now they're like bat wings for Dante. And they're flapping. And all they're doing is making the world around him colder because he's ice. He's stuck in his own iciness. And then he's beating his wings over the ice, making everyone else colder. It's a great image. And then this is cool too, he has 3 faces, Satan, because he's the simulacrum of the Trinity. So every sinner thinks he's God. So I pretend I'm God. So he's got the 3 faces. And from all 6 eyes, he weeps. Also, from all 3 mouths, he's chewing a sinner. He's got Cassius, Brutus, and Judas in the 3 mouths, the 3 traitors. But I've always thought it's just a great image of all of us sinners is we're stuck. It's heavy. It's cold. We're chewing on our past resentments. We're weeping in our sadness, and we're making the world around us colder. It's beautiful. It's so that's pride. See, that's an image of pride because Satan, that's his great sin, pride, which is why he needed Michael, right? Mikael, who's like God. So the great challenge to him, which we need all the time, is someone to say, wait a minute, you're not God. But the minute we say, I'm God, whew, black hole. I now cave in on myself. I suck everything into myself and I turn into Dante's Satan. So that's a great image. That's pride. That's the most fundamental. That's the uber capital sin. It's all the other ones flow from that. And you're given the Gospel of Matthew.
I'm reading
it for the first time.
I read it for the first time, and things start to strike me, like John the Baptist.
Yeah, okay.
Like the story of John the Baptist, being a reformed hedonist, being this man who's wearing like this who was sort of like, you know, scraggly and like, he kind of felt like a old Western character from some kind of like, he felt like a cowboy.
Eating locust and wearing
he felt like kind of rustic and strong and masculine. And my opinion of Christ at this point felt almost like I was reading about a Buddhist, like this very soft, fragile, all loving, all listening, but no ferocity, no romance.
Then you hadn't read the gospel.
Hadn't read the gospel
at that point.
I just had this art that I had seen of like this very soft,
more feminized.
Yeah,
Jesus.
yes. And so I hadn't had this idea of like the Old Testament Christ on a horse, cape dipped in blood, sword. I had none of that was in my lexicon of knowledge. So all I knew about was this very soft, meek Jesus, which didn't fit into my idea of what masculinity would be. I come from my dad was a Mongol biker, you know, it's like it wasn't appealing to me. And then I read about John the Baptist and it became quite appealing. The grizzle.
Yeah, right.
And then you get further into the gospel and you start getting into like elements of this like redemptive, it felt like I started reading about a route. I started like reading a map, like towards something that felt like let go. That's really what I got out of the Gospels. If I could wrap it up in 2 words, it was let go.
Hey friends, we just heard from Shia LaBeouf and Bishop Barron on the topic of pride. We heard Shia talk about his experience of having his life run by pride and even believing that versions of art and love and God were all the same thing, and that as he became famous as an actor, that he himself was taking this position of God, and that it had elevated him in the way that he viewed the world through his pride and through his ego. And that even as he hit rock bottom, he had this experience where a director reached out to him, and he thought that this was a moment to get back on the ladder and begin to climb again towards fulfilling his ego and his pride. We see that Shia, in this experience that he's dealing with, is wrestling with his pride and ego, but as he's diving into this character that he is supposed to play, Padre Pio, and he begins to sit and learn and read the Gospels, what it does for him. And we had that moment where Bishop Barron shared about what pride is and how it makes us like a black hole that sucks everything into ourselves. And that ultimately it destroys not just ourselves, but others, as it ruins relationships, ruins connections, ruins so many different things. We finished this video with Shia taking time to walk us through his first journey through the gospel. And as he gets to the end, he summarizes it with 2 words: let go. What a beautiful picture that is of the gospel, of the redemption found in Christ alone, through the shedding of his blood and the purchasing of you and I, as we can take a moment to acknowledge our sin, acknowledge our pride, acknowledge our arrogance, and surrender and submit our ways to him and enter into eternal life. We get this experience of letting go of all of those things that have held us captive for so long. I hope that this video is encouraging for you and that there are some things in this that can help you deal with your own pride and ego, just as I myself have learned things from both of these men sharing. I hope that you all have a great rest of your day.